All right, here we go. So, a little preamble to the story, actually. I was booked months before this to be here with you all because we knew that I was going to be going on book tour in support of this book, Outshining Trauma. And I had no idea what the theme was going to be. And when I heard that the theme was home, I howled. Because I am someone who has never had a sense of home, which is the same thing as me saying I've had a million homes, and I have a million wild stories to tell, and none of them have to do with home, really. I wanted to tell you the story of how I met Bonnie, the night that I inserted myself between her and a drunk, aggressive asshole who was hitting on her because I was sick of men and their shit. That's a good story. Makes me look pretty cool. But I also wanted to tell you about how Bonnie one day returned the favor many years later when I was at the bottom of my heroin addiction. And her and a friend bought a one-way ticket for me to New York City and let me stay on their couches for months so I could get my shit together. And I wanted to tell you the story about how I went from that moment to somehow being a psychotherapist in private practice and touring the country on their third book about healing trauma. But it was decided that I would tell you a story that is so much more weird than that. And it goes like this. Yeah, home has always been fraught for me. My father was an N-word touting racist from Oklahoma. He was a border patrol agent who migrated, to the Imperial Valley of California, where he met my Mexican mother and her two Mexican daughters, and somehow scooped them up as a literal white knight. And apparently he was a really wonderful guy until I was born. When I was born, they found out he had been holding it in the entire time. The drunkenness, the meanness, just the vile emotional abuse. And so that's what I knew for the first 4 years of my life with that man, until he moved back to Oklahoma. And I maintained a relationship with him, but the main point is, I grew up in a home that reverberated with the energy of that trauma. And it was such that I was radicalized in my teenage years by the third wave feminism of Kathleen Hanna and Bikini Kill and Riot Grrrl punk rock music and the radical politics of Emma Goldman. And that set the stage for me at 18, wandering out into the world having no idea who the fuck I was and having no designs on a future. I didn't want a job. I didn't want to go to college. I didn't want to punch a clock. I didn't want to pay taxes. I wanted nothing to do with your capitalism. I wanted to drop out, man. I'm free. And so I found some people who had dropped out, and they seemed pretty free. They were also a little bit fringe. You might know them as the Hare Krishnas. Yeah, those folks. Shaved head, long ponytail in the back. Orange robes, chanting in Union Square, serving Indian food on college campuses. Fuck, I love them. I love them so much. And I moved right in to an ashram in San Diego filled with white people doing deep Hindu shit. And it was beautiful. It was the answer. All we did was sing and dance all day. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare. You get it. You get it. It was rad. My home was a literal temple covered in gold. It was marbled floors, and I was right downstairs from my bedroom. And there was a lot of weird aspects of it as well. Of course. Like sleeping on a plank of wood, like cold showers at 4 a.m, like having to shower after every poop, because we're maintaining the highest level of cleanliness for the Lord. It was very inefficient. And we also had no money, so we had to figure some things out. Like if you needed a new pair of underwear, what you had to do was tear up an old monk's robe and make a little belt that you would tie around your waist. And then you would tear another strip, and I'll never forget this, that was as wide as your two nipples. And you would pull it up under the belt and then fold it over and push everything down. Why? Because you are 19 years old in a male body trying to be celibate. I don't recommend this. And then there was the sticking point. The sticking point was that I was a radical feminist in an Orthodox Hindu environment, which meant not only gender segregation, but gender hierarchy. It was always the men chanting and singing in the front of the temple, and always the women in the back, and it went from there. So I came to be known as somebody who had a lot of feminist freakouts in the temple, such that they even assigned a woman. I was allowed to speak to one woman in the temple. Her name was Krishna, and it was part of her service to the temple to address my feminist freakouts. And our conversations usually ended with her being like, they called everybody Bhakta in the temple, which means devotee. Bhakta Ralph, you're talking about a political ideology. I'm an actual woman. And I'm telling you that I'm empowered by this. Which are you going to go with? And that worked for a little while. Except there came a time when I couldn't take it anymore, and it was well known that I was cracking up in the temple. And it was around this time that my roommate, Dr. Randy, who was always saying the weirdest things, he was always coming up with like the most strange spiritual philosophy on the spot. I don't know nothing. And he walked up to me one day and he said, Dr. Ralph, you must be very careful where your mind wanders when you're chanting the holy mantra. When you're chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna loves you so much. And it says in the Bhagavad Gita that Krishna is the wish-fulfilling jewel. He is the granter of the desires of the devotees. And if your mind wanders to some random thing, you might think that you actually want that. Then what are you going to do? I didn't know how I was going to get out of that temple until then. Because the next morning, I was like, here's the plan. We sat down for 2.5 hours of a different kind of chanting, what were called our japa rounds, where we would chant, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Hare Hare, for like 2.5 hours. Imagine a room full of 40 people doing this. It was like an outtake from The Shining. And on that morning, I said to myself, I'm going to perseverate on one thought. And that one thought was, Krishna, send me a van. Let me live in a van. I will park it at the beach. It'll have a nice little mattress and an acoustic guitar. Maybe I'll have a girl over sometimes. And I'll stay connected to the temple because I'm going to need to shower several times a day. And I will live a holy life on my own terms. Please send me a van so I can be free. This next part, I can't even believe this true, because the next day, there were suddenly a bunch of dudes we had never seen in the temple before hanging around. And it turned out that they were traveling monks who were following alternative tours to sell Hare Krishna literature in the parking lot to proselytize our religion. And they lived in vans. And they were at our temple because one of them was sick and had to get off the road, and they needed a replacement. Was this a coincidence? Or was it destiny? I went with destiny. Literally 48 hours after I prayed to Krishna for a van, I was pulling off to follow the vans Weezer and No Doubt on tour. There was a catch. I was suddenly surrounded by 7 hardcore celibate Hare Krishna men. And it turned out that they were following these alternative tours because they were looking for what they called sweeties, which was a young, impressionable kid that they could coerce into believing in what we believed. I couldn't square up with this at all, but I had no hair, no money, no clothes. No opportunities, no options. And so I got pretty good at selling books that summer. Here's my spiel. Hey guys, are you Weezers or No Doubters? Personally, I'm a No Doubter. You know why? Because Gwen Stefani, you know how she wears that thing in the middle of her forehead? It's called a bindi. It comes from India. Check it out, this book comes from India. It talks about how to get high and stay high forever. Second problem. It turned out that these celibate men had a method of remaining celibate that entailed talking trash about how dumb women are over lunch every day. Go for that shit. And I knew I was done the day that I heard these words. You know, women are pretty great. They're the big gulp of the spiritual world. They have 32 ounces of spiritual prowess. It's just that men are the super big gulp. We have 64 ounces of spiritual prowess. And so a woman's best bet is to find a nice, pious man, get him to marry her, and then ride his coattails into enlightenment. And I wasn't really lying the next morning when I said I was too sick to sell books that day. And I didn't know what I was going to do. I had no options. We were in Nashville, Tennessee at this point. And I just said, I can't sell books today. And Aishwarya, the caravan leader, said, no problem. I'm going to run errands in town. You can come along with me. And we go to the post office, and he goes in, and I decide to stay in the van. And I look over, and there's a 7-Eleven. And my mind wasn't on big gulps. My mind was on the payphone outside, and the fact that my fundamentalist Christian dad was 2 states away. And so without a thought, I hopped out of the van, and I called him collect. And I said, hello, abusive dad. Would you like to save your son from the satanic cults? And he said, I'll be right there. 24 hours later, it was over. The original bad man in my life came to save me from the new bad men in my life. And we pulled onto the highway, headed towards Lake Eufaul, Oklahoma. And I closed my eyes, and I only had one thought in my head. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare,